Hi and welcome. If you enjoy this story, please remember to like and subscribe. Now it's time to sit back, relax, and enjoy. This is the story of Bitcoin, not the sanitized version they'll teach in business schools, or the romanticized tale crypto influencers spin on social media. This story is messy, absurd, brilliant, and occasionally involving people losing millions of dollars because they forgot passwords or deleted files. It's a story that begins with a mysterious programmer, weaves through pizza purchases and illegal digital marketplaces, and somehow ends up with corporations and governments adopting it while simultaneously trying to regulate it. Welcome to the strangest financial revolution in modern history. Long before Bitcoin existed, there was a group of digital visionaries shouting into the void of early internet forums. They called themselves cypherpunks, which sounds like a sci-fi movie title, but was actually deadly serious. These were cryptographers, programmers, and privacy advocates who saw the future and didn't like what they found. Governments tracking every transaction, corporations harvesting every click, and financial institutions charging fees for the privilege of moving your own money. The cypherpunk mailing list, founded in 1992, was their meeting place. Instead of office water cooler gossip, they traded encryption schemes and libertarian philosophy. Timothy May wrote manifestos about crypto anarchy. John Gilmore declared that the net interprets censorship as damage and roots around it. And somewhere in the digital shadows, brilliant minds were trying to solve an impossible problem. How do you create digital money without a central authority? The attempts were spectacular failures, each one teaching the next generation what not to do. David Chaum created eCash in the 1980s, a form of digital cash that required a central bank, missing the point entirely, like trying to invent democracy while insisting on keeping the king. Adam Back invented Hashcash in 1997, a system designed to prevent email spam by making senders solve computational puzzles. Brilliant concept, wrong application. Wei Dai proposed B-money in 1998, sketching out a decentralized currency that existed only in theory, like a startup pitch that never gets built. Nick Szabo designed BitGold around the same time, coming enticingly close to Bitcoin's eventual design, but never quite bridging the final gap. Each failure taught the same lesson. Creating decentralized digital money wasn't just a technical problem, it was the technical problem. How do you prevent double spending without a central authority? How do you create trust between strangers? How do you build something that governments can't shut down and banks can't corrupt? For over a decade, the brightest minds in cryptography hammered against this problem, like software developers debugging the world's most complex program. They made progress, certainly. They developed the tools that would eventually become Bitcoin's building blocks: cryptographic hashing, digital signatures, proof-of-work systems. But the final synthesis eluded them, like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Then on October 31st, 2008, Halloween night, because apparently even revolutionary monetary systems have a sense of dramatic timing, an email appeared on the cryptography mailing list. The sender identified himself as Satoshi Nakamoto, a name that meant nothing to anyone. The subject line read, Bitcoin P2P eCash paper. Attached was a 9-page PDF that would change everything. The Bitcoin whitepaper wasn't just a technical document, it was a declaration of independence from the entire financial system, wrapped in the academic prose of a computer science paper. Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, sounds dry enough to cure insomnia, but hidden within its technical specifications was a revolution. Satoshi had done what no one else could: solve the double spending problem without requiring trust in any central authority. The solution was elegant, almost obvious in hindsight, like all great discoveries. Instead of preventing double spending, Bitcoin would make it economically irrational. Instead of trusting banks, users would trust mathematics. Instead of relying on governments, the system would be secured by competition among miners who were rewarded for honest behavior. The key insight was proof of work, borrowed from Adam Back's Hashcash, but weaponized for monetary policy. Miners would compete to solve computational puzzles, and whoever won would get to add the next block of transactions to the blockchain. But here's where it got clever. To reverse a transaction, you'd need to redo all the computational work that came after it. The deeper a transaction was buried in the blockchain, the more expensive it became to fake. It was like building a tower of mathematical proof, where each flaw made the foundation harder to destroy. Want to change a transaction from last week? You'd need to rebuild the entire tower, floor by floor, while everyone else is still building upward. By the time you caught up, they'd be 50 floors higher. Good luck with that. But the white paper's real genius wasn't in its technical specifications, it was in what it didn't say. Nowhere did Satoshi mention overthrowing governments or replacing banks. The language was clinical, almost boring. Yet between the lines, anyone with half a brain could see the implications. This wasn't just digital money. This was digital money that no government could control, no bank could manipulate, and no corporation could corrupt. The reaction on the mailing list was muted. A few technical questions, some skeptical comments, general acknowledgement that it was interesting. Nobody seemed to grasp that they'd just witnessed the financial equivalent of the internet being invented. But that's how revolutions work. They start quietly, with a few curious people downloading software and running it to see what happens. On January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi mined the first Bitcoin block. Embedded in that Genesis block was a message, The Times, 3rd January 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. It was the headline from that day's London Times, a not-so-subtle commentary on the financial crisis that was then devastating the global economy. While governments were printing money to save banks that had gambled with other people's savings, Satoshi was creating money that couldn't be printed, inflated, or manipulated. The revolution had begun. Most people just didn't know it yet. The first Bitcoin transaction was sent on January 12, 2009, from Satoshi to Hal Finney, a cryptographer who would become Bitcoin's first tragic hero, though he didn't know it yet. 10 Bitcoins, worth nothing to most people, priceless to a few visionaries who understood what they were witnessing. Hal Finney was the kind of person who makes you believe in human potential. A brilliant cryptographer who had worked on some of the earliest email encryption systems. He was also battling ALS, a disease that was slowly stealing his ability to move while leaving his mind sharp as ever. When Satoshi's announcement appeared on the mailing list, Hal was one of the few who immediately grasped its significance. He downloaded the software, started mining, and became Bitcoin's first user. Their correspondence reveals the intimate birth of a revolution. Satoshi, mysterious and careful, sharing technical details and fixing bugs. Hal, enthusiastic and encouraging, providing feedback and moral support. It was like watching two master programmers build something that would outlive them both, working in digital isolation while the rest of the world was focused on the global financial crisis. The early Bitcoin community was tiny, weird, and wonderful. They gathered on forums like bitcointalk.org, sharing mining tips and debating economics with the fervour of startup founders arguing about equity splits. Most were programmers, cryptographers, and libertarian-leaning tech enthusiasts who saw Bitcoin as either a fascinating experiment or the future of money. Sometimes both. Mining in those days was simple. People ran the software on their laptops and home computers, earning hundreds of Bitcoins for the electricity cost of running a television. The difficulty was so low that you could mine a block with hardware that wouldn't power a modern smartphone. Satoshi himself probably mined close to 1 million Bitcoins in the first year, coins that remain untouched to this day, like a digital trust fund that nobody can access. The community's first major challenge came in the form of economics. Bitcoin had value, computational energy had been expended to create it. But what was that value in real-world terms? How do you price something that exists only as cryptographic proof? The answer came in the form of pizza. On May 22, 2010, a programmer named Laszlo Haniec posted on the Bitcoin forum, "I'll pay 10,000 Bitcoins for a couple of pizzas, like maybe 2 large ones, so I have some left over for the next day. I like having leftover pizza to nibble on later." Another user took him up on the offer, ordering 2 Papa John's pizzas for delivery to Laszlo's address in exchange for 10,000 Bitcoins. At the time, this seemed like a fair trade, about $25 worth of pizza for $25 worth of computational effort. Nobody could have predicted that those 10,000 Bitcoins would one day be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. May 22nd is now celebrated as Bitcoin Pizza Day, commemorating the first real-world Bitcoin transaction. It's become a holiday of sorts in the crypto community, though one suspects Laszlo himself might prefer to forget it. Those pizzas are now the most expensive meal in human history, making corporate executive lunches look like fast food. But here's what the pizza transaction really represented: proof that Bitcoin could work as actual money. Someone had provided a service, received Bitcoin in return, and both parties were satisfied with the exchange. It was a small step for a programmer, a giant leap for decentralized currency. The early community was also refreshingly generous. Bitcoin faucets, websites that gave away free Bitcoins to anyone who asked, were common. Gavin Andresen, who would later become Bitcoin's lead developer, ran one that gave away 5 Bitcoins per visitor. The idea that these digital tokens might someday be worth thousands of dollars each seemed absurd. They were giving away what would eventually become small fortunes, like tech companies in the 1990s handing out stock options like candy. This was Bitcoin's golden age of innocence, when the technology was fascinating, the community was small and supportive, and the biggest controversy was whether Bitcoin could actually work. The price rarely moved, the software was constantly improving, and new users were welcomed with the enthusiasm of early internet users sharing their discoveries. It couldn't last. Nothing this disruptive ever stays innocent for long. By 2011, Bitcoin had attracted the attention of people who valued privacy for reasons that had nothing to do with philosophical principles about financial freedom. The Silk Road, launched in February 2011, was an online marketplace accessible only through Tor, the anonymity network. Its proprietor, known as Dread Pirate Roberts, sold everything from marijuana to heroin, accepting payment only in Bitcoin. This was Bitcoin's first encounter with moral complexity. The same properties that made it attractive to libertarian-minded tech enthusiasts, pseudonymity, decentralization, resistance to censorship, also made it perfect for illegal commerce. Critics pounced on this connection, painting Bitcoin as the preferred currency of criminals and drug dealers. But here's the paradox: the Silk Road proved Bitcoin actually worked. For years, critics had dismissed Bitcoin as monopoly money with no real value. But when people were willing to risk federal prison to acquire and spend Bitcoins for illegal goods, it demonstrated that this digital currency had crossed the threshold from experiment to reality. The Silk Road wasn't Bitcoin's shame, it was its proof of concept. Ross Ulbricht, the young man behind the Dread Pirate Roberts persona, was a libertarian idealist who saw the Silk Road as a way to reduce the harm caused by the drug war. His vision was almost naive in its optimism, a peaceful marketplace where consenting adults could trade freely without government interference. He genuinely believed he was making the world a better place by moving drug commerce off violent streets and onto the civilized internet. The FBI didn't share his perspective. The investigation into the Silk Road was a cat-and-mouse game that lasted 2 years. Ulbricht was careful, using multiple layers of encryption and anonymity, but he made classic mistakes. Reusing usernames, posting on public forums, and eventually growing careless about his operational security. In October 2013, he was arrested in a San Francisco library, his laptop seized while still logged into the Silk Road's administration panel. The government seized 144,000 bitcoins from Ulbricht's computers, worth about $28 million at the time. They also seized another 29,000 bitcoins from Silk Road servers. But here's where the story gets weird. The FBI became one of the world's largest bitcoin holders, and they had no idea what to do with them. The seizure created a fascinating legal precedent. If Bitcoin was worthless, fake money, as prosecutors claimed in court, why was the government so eager to seize it? If it was valuable enough to confiscate, didn't that imply it was real money? The cognitive dissonance was beautiful to behold. The government eventually auctioned off the seized bitcoins in batches, creating a bizarre spectacle of federal agents acting as cryptocurrency dealers. The auctions were conducted with all the dignity of a government surplus sale, like watching bureaucrats sell off confiscated sports cars, except the cars were mathematical objects that existed only as entries in a distributed database. Ross Ulbricht was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a sentence that struck many as disproportionate for running a website. But the government needed to send a message. Bitcoin might be decentralized, but the people using it still lived in jurisdictions with judges, juries, and federal prisons. The Silk Road's closure barely affected Bitcoin. New Darknet markets sprang up within days, accepting Bitcoin payments and continuing the trade. The ecosystem had grown beyond any single point of failure. Shutting down the Silk Road was like trying to stop file sharing by shutting down one website. The technology was already beyond central control. More importantly, Bitcoin had proven it could survive its association with crime. Banks launder money for cartels and terrorists regularly, but nobody suggests abolishing banks. Bitcoin's use by criminals was simply proof that it worked as money. All useful currencies are eventually adopted by people operating outside the law. The Silk Road era taught Bitcoin an important lesson. You can't control how your invention is used, but you can build it to survive anything. While the Silk Road was proving Bitcoin's utility to criminals, Mt. Gox was proving its utility to everyone else, and then spectacularly failing to protect it. Mt. Gox started life as Magic, the Gathering online exchange, a trading card marketplace that pivoted to Bitcoin in 2010 when its founder realized that digital currency might be more profitable than digital wizards. By 2013, it handled roughly 70% of all Bitcoin transactions, making it the de facto central bank of a supposedly decentralized currency. This should have been everyone's first warning sign. The exchange was run by Marc Carpeles, a French programmer living in Tokyo who seemed to have learned business management from the same school that taught Theranos executives about medical devices. Mt. Gox's code was held together with digital duct tape and hope. Its security practices would have embarrassed a teenager running an online store, and its customer service consisted mainly of ignoring complaints until they went away. But Mt. Gox had one crucial advantage. It was first. In the early days of Bitcoin, when exchanges were rare and alternatives were scarce, being first was better than being good. People tolerated Mt. Gox's problems because they had no choice. It was either trust Carpeles with your Bitcoins or trust yourself to figure out peer-to-peer trading, which was about as user-friendly as coding your own web browser. The problem started small, as problems always do. Withdrawal delays of a few days became delays of a few weeks. Technical glitches became chronic system failures. Customer complaints became desperate pleas for help that disappeared into the digital void. But the price of Bitcoin kept rising, so people kept trading, hoping their problems would resolve themselves through pure wishful thinking. By early 2014, Mt. Gox was handling withdrawal requests by printing them out and sorting them into physical piles on desks like a 21st century company trying to manage email with filing cabinets. The exchange was processing withdrawals manually, one by one, while new deposits poured in automatically. It was like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon while the faucet ran at full blast. The end came suddenly, as ends often do. On February 7th, 2014, Mt. Gox suspended all Bitcoin withdrawals, citing transaction malleability issues, a technical problem that sounded serious but was actually solved by competent exchanges years earlier. The Bitcoin community watched in horror as the largest exchange in the ecosystem slowly collapsed in real time, like watching a startup burn through its funding while insisting everything was fine. On February 24th, 2014, Mt. Gox went offline entirely. The exchange's website displayed only a blank page, as if the entire company had simply vanished into the digital ether. No explanation, no apologies, no information about what had happened to users' money. Just nothing. The bankruptcy filing revealed the scope of the disaster. 850,000 bitcoins missing, worth about $450 million at the time. Mt. Gox claimed they had been hacked over several years, with attackers slowly draining the exchange's reserves while the management remained oblivious. It was either the most sophisticated heist in history or the most incompetent business management since WeWork tried to justify its $47 billion valuation. Later investigations revealed the truth was probably both. The hack appeared to be a combination of external theft and internal mismanagement, so profound it bordered on criminal negligence. Transaction records were a mess, security was non-existent, and the exchange had been technically insolvent for years while continuing to accept new deposits. It was a Ponzi scheme disguised as a technology company, or maybe a technology company that had accidentally become a Ponzi scheme. The Mt. Gox collapse should have killed Bitcoin. The largest exchange had failed spectacularly, hundreds of thousands of users had lost their money, and the entire ecosystem looked like a den of thieves and incompetence. Traditional financial media gleefully pronounced Bitcoin dead, comparing it to dot-com bubble companies and predicting its imminent collapse. Instead, something remarkable happened. Bitcoin survived. Other exchanges stepped up to handle the trading volume. New security practices were developed and adopted. The decentralized nature of Bitcoin meant that Mt. Gox's failure, while painful, didn't bring down the entire network. The blockchain kept running, blocks kept being mined, and transactions kept being processed, completely unaffected by the human drama surrounding one badly managed company. The Mt. Gox collapse was Bitcoin's first stress test, and it passed. Not gracefully. Thousands of people lost money they couldn't afford to lose, and the damage to Bitcoin's reputation lasted for years. But the core system proved it could survive the failure of its largest business partner. It was like watching the internet survive the collapse of its largest website. Painful, but not fatal. The incident also taught the Bitcoin community a valuable lesson about centralization. A decentralized currency built on trustless technology had been nearly destroyed by people's willingness to trust a centralized exchange. Mt. Gox's motto was Bitcoin Trusted Exchange, which in hindsight reads like a startup advertising, move fast and break things, while their product literally breaks everything. Bitcoin survived Mt. Gox, but it emerged scarred and wiser. The community developed new mantras. Not your keys, not your coins. Don't trust, verify, and perhaps most importantly, if it's too good to be true, it probably involves giving your money to a French programmer in Tokyo. By 2015, Bitcoin faced a problem that would have delighted its early critics: success. The network was processing so many transactions that it was approaching its technical limits. like a popular website trying to handle viral traffic with servers from the 1990s. The Bitcoin blockchain could only handle about 7 transactions per second, compared to Visa's theoretical maximum of 65,000. As adoption grew, the network began to strain under its own popularity. The solution seemed obvious: increase the block size. Bitcoin blocks were limited to 1 megabyte of data, a limit that Satoshi had implemented as a temporary spam prevention measure. Simply increasing this limit to 2 megabytes, 8 megabytes, or even 32 megabytes would allow more transactions per block and solve the scaling problem. What followed was the closest thing Bitcoin has ever had to a civil war. On one side were the big blockers, led by developers like Mike Hearn and Gavin Andresen, who argued that Bitcoin should scale by increasing block sizes. Their logic was straightforward. If you want more transactions, you need bigger blocks. They saw Bitcoin primarily as a payment system that should compete with PayPal and Visa by handling millions of daily transactions cheaply and efficiently. On the other side were the small blockers, centered around the development company Blockstream and developers like Greg Maxwell and Adam Back. They argued that increasing block sizes would centralize Bitcoin by making it harder for individuals to run full nodes. Their vision positioned Bitcoin as a settlement layer for high-value transactions, with smaller payments handled by second-layer solutions like the Lightning Network. The technical debate quickly became ideological warfare. Big blockers accused small blockers of trying to cripple Bitcoin to promote their own second-layer solutions. Small blockers accused big blockers of not understanding the fundamental security properties that made Bitcoin valuable. Both sides deployed increasingly sophisticated propaganda campaigns, complete with social media manipulation, conference disruptions, and personal attacks that would have impressed political campaign managers. The debate revealed fundamental disagreements about what Bitcoin was supposed to be. Was it peer-to-peer electronic cash, as described in the whitepaper, optimized for daily transactions? Or was it digital gold, a store of value that prioritized security and decentralization over transaction throughput? Both visions were compelling, and both had legitimate technical arguments supporting them. The conflict intensified when it became clear that Bitcoin's decentralized governance model, or lack thereof, made resolving such disputes nearly impossible. Unlike traditional systems where authorities could make binding decisions, Bitcoin required consensus among miners, developers, businesses, and users. Getting thousands of independent actors to agree on anything is like getting Congress to pass meaningful legislation. Technically possible, but practically unlikely. The situation reached a breaking point in 2017 when big block supporters created Bitcoin Cash, a fork of Bitcoin with larger blocks. The cryptocurrency split into 2 separate networks, each claiming to be the real Bitcoin. It was like watching a successful startup split in civil war, with both sides claiming legitimacy and trying to convince customers and investors to recognize their authority. Bitcoin Cash launched with great fanfare and the backing of several major businesses, including the largest mining operations. Many predicted it would eventually overtake the original Bitcoin, proving that bigger blocks were the correct scaling solution. The market would decide which vision of Bitcoin was superior. The market spoke clearly. Bitcoin Cash peaked at about 20% of Bitcoin's value and has since declined to less than 1%. The small block vision won, not through technical arguments or developer consensus, but through the collective decision of millions of users who voted with their wallets. The scaling war taught Bitcoin several important lessons. First, governance through market forces, while messy and contentious, ultimately works. Second, Bitcoin's value proposition isn't primarily about cheap transactions. If it were, dozens of altcoins would have surpassed it by now. Third, decentralized systems can survive ideological splits, even when those splits are painful and destructive. Most importantly, the war demonstrated Bitcoin's anti-fragility, its ability to grow stronger through stress. The contentious debate forced the community to articulate why Bitcoin was valuable and what properties were worth preserving. The fork allowed both visions to be tested in parallel, providing definitive market feedback about user preferences. Bitcoin emerged from the scaling wars more focused and resilient. The community had tested its governance mechanisms under extreme stress and found them functional, if not elegant. And developers, having learned from the near disaster of the scaling debate, became more conservative about proposed changes, a development that critics called stagnation, but supporters called stability. By 2020, Bitcoin had survived a decade of crises that would have destroyed most technologies: exchange failures, government bans, civil wars, and countless predictions of its demise. But its greatest test was yet to come: acceptance by the very institutions it was designed to replace. The transformation began quietly. MicroStrategy, a business intelligence company few people had heard of, started buying Bitcoin as a treasury asset under the leadership of Michael Saylor, a CEO who spoke about Bitcoin with the fervor of a startup founder pitching to investors. Tesla followed, purchasing $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin and briefly accepting it as payment for cars. Square, PayPal, and other payment companies began offering Bitcoin services to their customers. But the real watershed moment came when institutional investors started paying attention. Paul Tudor Jones, a legendary hedge fund manager, publicly announced he was allocating 1 to 2% of his portfolio to Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation. Stanley Druckenmiller, another investing titan, compared Bitcoin to gold and suggested it might be a better store of value. These weren't crypto enthusiasts or libertarian ideologues. They were serious money managers responsible for billions of dollars in institutional capital. The transformation was surreal for long-time Bitcoin users. The same financial institutions that had spent years dismissing Bitcoin as digital monopoly money were suddenly scrambling to offer Bitcoin services to their clients. JP Morgan, whose CEO Jamie Dimon had called Bitcoin a fraud, quietly started offering Bitcoin exposure to their wealth management clients. Goldman Sachs reopened their crypto trading desk. Bank of New York Mellon announced they would custody Bitcoin for institutional clients. It was like watching traditional media companies suddenly embrace streaming after spending years dismissing Netflix as a fad. The cognitive dissonance was beautiful to behold. The institutional adoption narrative reached its peak when El Salvador became the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. President Nayib Bukele, a young tech-savvy populist, announced that El Salvador would accept Bitcoin alongside the US dollar as official currency. Citizens could pay taxes in Bitcoin, businesses would be required to accept it as payment, and the government would provide digital wallets to facilitate adoption. The announcement triggered a global media frenzy. Critics argued that adopting Bitcoin as legal tender was reckless monetary policy that would hurt El Salvador's poor. Supporters hailed it as visionary leadership that would position El Salvador as a hub for Bitcoin innovation. The International Monetary Fund warned about the risks. Bitcoin enthusiasts booked flights to San Salvador. The reality, as always, was more complex than either narrative suggested. El Salvador's Bitcoin adoption was partially successful. The government accumulated thousands of Bitcoins, Bitcoin-focused businesses opened in San Salvador, and the country attracted international attention and investment. But widespread adoption by ordinary citizens remained limited, partly due to technical challenges and partly due to Bitcoin's price volatility. The El Salvador experiment highlighted Bitcoin's fundamental tension. It was simultaneously revolutionary technology and awkward currency. As a savings technology for protecting wealth from inflation and monetary debasement, Bitcoin was nearly perfect. As a daily payment system for buying coffee or groceries, it remained clunky and expensive. Meanwhile, the institutional adoption story was creating its own contradictions. Bitcoin was supposed to be trustless money that eliminated the need for financial intermediaries, but institutional adoption was happening primarily through those same intermediaries: custodial services, regulated exchanges, and traditional investment products like ETFs that wrapped Bitcoin in familiar financial structures. The Bitcoin ETF approval in 2024 marked the completion of Bitcoin's institutional transformation. Instead of holding Bitcoin directly, investors could buy shares in funds that held Bitcoin on their behalf, complete with traditional financial protections and regulatory oversight. It was like turning a radical decentralized currency into a conventional financial asset. Technically successful, but philosophically strange. This institutional embrace brought legitimacy and capital, but also raised uncomfortable questions about Bitcoin's future. If most people accessed Bitcoin through traditional financial institutions, did its decentralized properties matter? If Bitcoin became primarily an investment asset rather than a medium of exchange, had it succeeded or failed? The answer, like most things about Bitcoin, was both. No aspect of Bitcoin generates more heat, literally and figuratively, than its energy consumption. The numbers are staggering. Bitcoin mining consumes more electricity annually than entire countries like Argentina or the Netherlands. The carbon footprint is massive. The environmental impact is real, and the optics are terrible for a technology trying to position itself as the future of money. Critics paint Bitcoin as an environmental disaster, a digital equivalent of burning coal to create numbers on computer screens. They argue that Bitcoin's energy consumption is growing exponentially with no upper limit, threatening global climate goals and accelerating environmental catastrophe. Environmental groups have called for Bitcoin bans. Governments have cited environmental concerns when restricting mining, and even some Bitcoin supporters acknowledge the energy issue is problematic. But dig deeper, and the energy story becomes more complex. Like most things about Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining is fundamentally different from most energy consumption because it's location agnostic and time flexible. Miners don't care where they're located as long as they have cheap electricity and internet connectivity. This unique property allows Bitcoin mining to utilize stranded energy resources that would otherwise be wasted: excess hydroelectric power during flood seasons, flared natural gas from oil drilling, geothermal energy in remote locations. In many cases, Bitcoin mining actually improves energy economics by providing a buyer of last resort for excess energy production. Renewable energy sources like solar and wind are intermittent, producing more electricity than the grid can absorb during peak conditions. Bitcoin miners can absorb this excess production, making renewable energy projects more economically viable. The geographic distribution of Bitcoin mining reflects this energy arbitrage. A significant portion of mining happens in regions with abundant renewable energy: hydroelectric power in the Pacific Northwest and Scandinavia, geothermal energy in Iceland, solar power in Texas. Chinese miners, before the government ban, concentrated in Sichuan province during the wet season to access cheap hydroelectric power. But the environmental debate misses a deeper question. What is Bitcoin's energy consumption compared against? Bitcoin isn't just a payments network, it's a monetary system that provides financial services without requiring traditional banking infrastructure. The global banking system consumes enormous amounts of energy through bank branches, data centers, ATM networks, and payment processing systems. Add in the energy costs of gold mining, armored car transportation, and government currency printing, and Bitcoin's energy footprint becomes more reasonable. Bitcoin's energy consumption also serves a specific purpose: securing the network against attack. Unlike most energy uses, which provide temporary benefits, the energy spent mining Bitcoin creates permanent security. Every kilowatt hour consumed makes the blockchain more resistant to manipulation, like building a digital fortress with walls made of computational work. The energy criticism also assumes Bitcoin's energy consumption is pure waste, but this reflects a misunderstanding of how mining works. Bitcoin mining is essentially a market for converting energy into digital security. Miners are incentivized to find the cheapest, most efficient energy sources, which often means utilizing renewable energy or waste energy that would otherwise be unused. Some of Bitcoin's most interesting developments involve energy innovation. In El Salvador, volcanic geothermal energy powers Bitcoin mining operations. In Texas, Bitcoin miners are being integrated into the electrical grid as flexible load balancers, consuming excess power during peak production and shutting down during high-demand periods. In Africa, Bitcoin mining is making small-scale renewable energy projects economically viable by providing a consistent buyer for excess production. The energy debate has also spurred innovation in mining hardware. Each new generation of mining equipment is more energy efficient than the last, processing more hash calculations per kilowatt hour. This efficiency improvement is driven by pure economic incentive. Miners who can process more hashes with less energy have competitive advantages. Perhaps most importantly, Bitcoin's energy consumption is self-limiting in a way that critics rarely acknowledge. Mining profitability depends on the Bitcoin price and the difficulty adjustment algorithm. If Bitcoin's price doesn't increase faster than energy costs, mining becomes unprofitable and energy consumption decreases. The system has built-in economic feedback loops that prevent unlimited energy consumption. The environmental debate around Bitcoin reflects broader questions about energy use and priorities. Is the energy spent securing a global, censorship-resistant monetary network justified? How does this compare to the energy spent on other human activities? Entertainment, advertising, travel, or financial services? These are philosophical questions as much as environmental ones, and the answers depend on how much value you place on Bitcoin's unique properties. Permissionless transactions, resistance to censorship, protection against monetary debasement, and financial access for the unbanked. Bitcoin's energy consumption is real, significant, and worth discussing seriously. But the conversation is more nuanced than simple environmental catastrophe, narratives suggest, involving complex trade-offs between energy use, financial innovation, and monetary sovereignty. In the technical corners of Bitcoin forums, where discussions evolve into complex debates about cryptographic assumptions and computational complexity, lurks a threat that haunts even the most confident Bitcoin advocates: quantum computing. The threat is both theoretical and inevitable. Bitcoin security depends on cryptographic algorithms that would take classical computers billions of years to break. But quantum computers, when they mature, could potentially crack these algorithms in hours or days. It's like building an impregnable digital fortress, only to discover that someone has invented the computational equivalent of dynamite. The most vulnerable aspect of Bitcoin is its reliance on elliptic curve digital signatures, the mathematical magic that proves ownership of Bitcoins without revealing private keys. A sufficiently powerful quantum computer using Shor's algorithm could derive private keys from public keys, essentially breaking Bitcoin's fundamental security model. The timeline for this quantum apocalypse remains uncertain, shrouded in the usual mix of academic optimism and corporate marketing. IBM, Google, and other tech giants regularly announce quantum computing breakthroughs, but we're still years away from quantum computers that could threaten Bitcoin. Current quantum computers are impressive proof of concepts that can factor small numbers under laboratory conditions, not practical machines that could attack real-world cryptography. But the mere possibility of quantum attacks has sparked intense debate within the Bitcoin community. Some developers argue that quantum-resistant cryptography should be implemented immediately, even if it makes transactions larger and more expensive. Others contend that premature quantum proofing would create unnecessary complexity for a threat that may be decades away. The quantum threat isn't unique to Bitcoin. It would affect all modern cryptography, from banking systems to military communications. If quantum computers become powerful enough to break elliptic curve cryptography, the entire digital security infrastructure of modern civilization would need upgrading. Bitcoin would be just one casualty in a much larger cryptographic revolution. This creates an interesting dynamic. Bitcoin's quantum vulnerability might actually be a feature, not a bug. Because Bitcoin is open source and globally distributed, any quantum attack would be immediately visible to the entire community. Unlike traditional financial systems that might hide security breaches to prevent panic, Bitcoin's transparency means that quantum threats would be detected and addressed quickly. The Bitcoin development community has already begun preparing for the post-quantum world. Researchers are experimenting with quantum-resistant signature schemes, analyzing the trade-offs between security and efficiency. The challenge is implementing these upgrades without breaking compatibility with existing wallets and applications, like upgrading a building's foundation while people are still living in it. Some proposed solutions involve hybrid approaches, where Bitcoin transactions use both classical and quantum-resistant signatures until the transition is complete. Others suggest implementing quantum-resistant cryptography as an optional upgrade that users could adopt voluntarily. The most elegant solutions would make quantum resistance transparent to users, upgrading security without changing the user experience. But here's the fascinating paradox. Bitcoin's potential quantum vulnerability might actually strengthen it in the long run. The threat forces continuous security innovation and ensures that Bitcoin's cryptography stays ahead of potential attacks. Traditional financial systems, protected by security through obscurity and regulatory moats, might be less prepared for quantum disruption than Bitcoin's paranoid, transparent development community. The quantum spectre also highlights Bitcoin's evolutionary nature. Unlike traditional monetary systems that resist change, Bitcoin can adapt to new threats through network upgrades. If quantum computers become a real threat, Bitcoin can evolve new defenses. If they don't, Bitcoin continues working with existing cryptography. It's like having an immune system that adapts to new diseases rather than hoping they never appear. Somewhere in digital limbo, there exists a fortune that would make lottery winners weep with envy. Millions of Bitcoins that have been lost forever, locked away by forgotten passwords, corrupted hard drives, and human fallibility. These aren't Bitcoins that have been stolen or spent. They're Bitcoins that exist on the blockchain but can never be accessed again. Like treasure locked in safes where everyone forgot the combination. The stories have become Bitcoin folklore, each one more tragic than the last. James Howells, a Welsh IT worker, accidentally threw away a hard drive containing 7,500 Bitcoins in 2013. The drive is somewhere in a Newport landfill, buried under years of garbage, worth over $100 million at current prices. Howells has offered the local council millions of dollars to excavate the landfill, but they've refused, citing environmental concerns. It's like knowing there's a winning lottery ticket buried in a garbage dump but being forbidden to dig. Stefan Thomas, a German programmer, owns 7,002 Bitcoins locked in an iron key hardware wallet. He's forgotten the password and has only 2 more guesses before the device encrypts itself forever. The Bitcoins sit there, tantalizingly close, yet completely inaccessible. Like looking at money through bulletproof glass, Thomas has made peace with his situation, calling it an expensive lesson in password management. These individual tragedies pale compared to the systemic losses from Bitcoin's early days. Chainalysis, a blockchain analysis company, estimates that approximately 4 million Bitcoins, worth over $200 billion, are permanently lost. That's nearly 20% of Bitcoin's total supply, gone forever due to human error hardware failures, and poor security practices. The largest lost fortune remains shrouded in mystery: Satoshi Nakamoto's bitcoins. The Bitcoin creator mined approximately 1.1 million bitcoins in the network's first year, coins that have never moved from their original addresses. These bitcoins represent the blockchain's greatest mystery. Are they lost due to death or disappeared keys, or are they deliberately untouched by a creator who wanted to remove themselves from their creation? The question of Satoshi's coins haunts the Bitcoin community like an unsolved mystery. If those bitcoins ever move, it would trigger a global financial earthquake. Markets would crash as investors panic sold, fearing that 1.1 million bitcoins might flood the market. But it would also answer the greatest mystery in cryptocurrency. Is Satoshi Nakamoto still alive? The lost coin phenomenon creates fascinating economic implications. Bitcoin's monetary policy assumes a fixed supply of 21 million coins, but the effective supply is actually lower due to permanent losses. This accidental deflation makes remaining bitcoins more scarce and potentially more valuable. Like a limited edition collectible where some of the items are accidentally destroyed. Some economists argue that lost coins are actually beneficial for Bitcoin holders, creating artificial scarcity that increases value. Others worry about the psychological impact. If people associate Bitcoin with irreversible losses, they might avoid using it altogether. It's like having a currency made of glass that shatters if you handle it incorrectly. The lost coin problem has spurred innovation in wallet security and recovery systems. Modern Bitcoin wallets use seed phrases, 12 or 24 words that can restore access to Bitcoins even if the original device is lost. Hardware wallets provide secure storage with backup options. Multi-signature setups distribute the access among multiple keys, preventing single points of failure. But these security improvements can't recover Bitcoins that were lost before they were implemented. The early Bitcoin pioneers who mined thousands of coins on laptops and forgot about them, the developers who deleted wallet files thinking they were worthless, the investors who stored Bitcoins on exchanges that later failed, their losses are permanent monuments to the unforgiving nature of digital bearer assets. The lost coin phenomenon also highlights Bitcoin's philosophical implications. Unlike traditional bank accounts that can be recovered through legal processes and customer service, Bitcoin is truly final. When you lose Bitcoins, they're gone forever, like physical cash dropped in the ocean. This finality is both Bitcoin's greatest strength and its most terrifying weakness. Some entrepreneurs have built entire businesses around recovering lost Bitcoins. Companies like wallet recovery services use advanced techniques to crack passwords, repair corrupted files, and extract keys from damaged hardware. They typically charge 15 to 20% of recovered funds, making them highly motivated to solve even the most complex recovery challenges. The success stories are remarkable. Wallets recovered from water-damaged phones, passwords cracked using artificial intelligence, Bitcoins extracted from computers that have been dead for years. But for every success story, there are dozens of failures. Wallets that are too corrupted to repair, passwords that are too complex to crack, hardware that is too damaged to read. The lost coin mystery extends beyond individual tragedies to systemic questions about Bitcoin's future. As Bitcoin becomes more mainstream, will improved security practices reduce loss rates? Or will higher values make losses more devastating, even if they're less frequent? Will quantum computing eventually make it possible to recover Bitcoins from lost private keys, or will it make security even more complex? Perhaps most intriguingly, lost coins represent Bitcoin's most permanent feature. While governments can print more money, exchanges can be hacked, and developers can propose changes, lost Bitcoins stay lost forever. They're the most immutable aspect of an immutable system, digital artifacts that will outlast their owners, their heirs, and possibly civilization itself. In a strange way, Lost bitcoins are Bitcoin's greatest tribute to human fallibility and mathematical perfection. The coins exist, provably and permanently, on a blockchain that will outlive us all. But they're locked away by human mistakes, inaccessible tributes to the gap between digital precision and human frailty. Every revolution attracts its share of prophets, charlatans, and true believers, and Bitcoin's revolution has been no exception. The cryptocurrency space has produced some of the most fascinating personalities in modern finance: visionaries who saw the future clearly, grifters who exploited others' hopes and fears, and genuine believers who sacrificed everything for their digital faith. At the center of Bitcoin's educator pantheon stands Andreas Antonopoulos, a teacher who has spent over a decade explaining Bitcoin to anyone willing to listen. His talks have the cadence of a TED presentation, mixing technical explanations with philosophical insights about financial sovereignty and human freedom. Antonopoulos never became wealthy from Bitcoin. He famously gave away most of his early Bitcoins and focused on education rather than speculation. He embodies Bitcoin's educational missionary spirit, spreading the gospel of decentralized money to audiences worldwide. On the opposite end of the spectrum lurk the false prophets, individuals who claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto or position themselves as Bitcoin's spiritual successors. Craig Wright, an Australian computer scientist, has spent years claiming to be Bitcoin's creator, filing lawsuits and making increasingly bizarre assertions about his role in Bitcoin's development. His claims have been debunked repeatedly by technical experts, but he continues his performance like a startup founder, still claiming their failed company was ahead of its time. The most tragic figure in Bitcoin's pantheon might be John McAfee, the antivirus software pioneer, who reinvented himself as a cryptocurrency evangelist. McAfee embraced Bitcoin with the fervor of a convert, making increasingly outrageous predictions about its future price. He famously promised to eat his own genitals on live television if Bitcoin didn't reach $1 million by 2020, a bet that thankfully remained unclaimed when he died in a Spanish prison in 2021 while awaiting extradition on tax charges. McAfee's story illustrates the fine line between Bitcoin evangelism and dangerous delusion. His passion for cryptocurrency was genuine, but it became entangled with paranoia, tax evasion, and increasingly erratic behavior. He ended up as a cautionary tale about what happens when Bitcoin belief becomes Bitcoin obsession, like a tech entrepreneur who confuses disruption with destruction. The institutional evangelists tell a different story. Michael Saylor, CEO of MicroStrategy, transformed himself from software executive to Bitcoin maximalist prophet, converting his company's treasury to Bitcoin and evangelizing corporate adoption. His transformation was complete and absolute, like a traditional banker suddenly becoming a fintech startup founder. Saylor's presentations have the structure of corporate keynotes, mixing financial analysis with philosophical arguments about Bitcoin's inevitability. He speaks of digital property, monetary energy, and Bitcoin's role as humanity's solution to the debasement of fiat currency. Critics call him a zealot, supporters call him visionary. Both are probably correct. The evangelist phenomenon reflects Bitcoin's quasi-religious aspects. Bitcoin offers salvation from financial oppression, requires faith in mathematical principles, promises a future world transformed by decentralized money, and demands personal responsibility from its followers. It even has martyrs, people like Hal Finney, who dedicated their final years to Bitcoin's development, or Ross Ulbricht serving life in prison for creating the Silk Road. But Bitcoin's most interesting evangelists are often its quietest ones, the developers who work on Bitcoin's code not for fame or fortune, but because they believe in the technology. People like Peter Willer, who developed key Bitcoin improvements like segregated witness, or Matt Corallo, who maintains critical Bitcoin infrastructure, or the dozens of anonymous contributors who submit code improvements, fix bugs, and strengthen Bitcoin's foundation without seeking recognition. These technical evangelists operate more like open source maintainers than traditional thought leaders. They work in relative obscurity, motivated by technical excellence and philosophical commitment rather than personal glory. Their contributions are measured in code commits and protocol improvements rather than Twitter followers and speaking fees. The snake oil salesman phenomenon has been equally important in Bitcoin's development, providing cautionary examples of what Bitcoin evangelism shouldn't become. The space has attracted numerous scammers, fraudsters, and self-promoting charlatans who used Bitcoin's revolutionary rhetoric to mask traditional financial crimes. The ICO, initial coin offering, mania of 2017 produced hundreds of digital evangelists promising to revolutionize everything from shipping to dentistry using blockchain technology. Most were either deluded or fraudulent, raising millions of dollars for projects that never materialized. The ICO crash of 2018 was like watching the dot-com bubble burst, except with more cryptocurrency and fewer actual products. These boom and bust cycles of evangelist emergence and exposure have strengthened Bitcoin's community by developing antibodies against obvious frauds. Long-term Bitcoin supporters have learned to distinguish between genuine technical innovation and marketing hype disguised as revolution. The evangelist phenomenon also highlights Bitcoin's decentralized nature. Unlike traditional monetary systems that depend on central authorities, Bitcoin thrives through the distributed efforts of thousands of believers, educators, and developers. No single evangelist can control Bitcoin's future, but each contributes to its evolution and adoption. Perhaps most importantly, Bitcoin's evangelists reflect its global cross-cultural appeal. Bitcoin advocates exist in every country, speaking every language, adapted to local concerns and opportunities. A Bitcoin evangelist in Nigeria focuses on escaping currency devaluation and capital controls. A Bitcoin evangelist in El Salvador emphasizes financial inclusion and remittances. A Bitcoin evangelist in Hong Kong talks about censorship resistance and capital flight. This diversity of evangelical voices prevents Bitcoin from becoming captured by any single narrative or ideology. It's simultaneously a libertarian currency, a progressive technology, a conservative store of value, and a radical monetary experiment. Its meaning shifts depending on who's interpreting it and what problems they're trying to solve. As we reach the end of this chronicle, Bitcoin continues its eternal cycle, rising and falling, dying and being reborn, celebrated and condemned, understood and misunderstood. Like all revolutionary technologies, Bitcoin has become both more and less than its creators imagined. The Bitcoin of 2024 barely resembles the experimental digital cash system that Satoshi Nakamoto released in 2009. It has evolved from a cryptographic curiosity into a global financial phenomenon, survived multiple existential crises, and forced the entire world to reconsider the nature of money itself. Yet its core remains unchanged. A decentralized network secured by mathematics, resistant to censorship, and indifferent to human authorities. Bitcoin's journey from digital experiment to institutional asset reveals the strange dynamics of technological adoption. The same properties that made it attractive to criminals and libertarians, pseudonymity, decentralization, censorship resistance, eventually made it attractive to corporations and governments seeking alternatives to traditional financial systems. The transformation hasn't been without costs. Bitcoin's institutionalization has brought stability and legitimacy, but also complexity and regulatory compliance. The simple act of sending digital money between peers has been wrapped in layers of financial intermediation, tax reporting, and legal frameworks that would have horrified Bitcoin's early anarchist adopters. Yet Bitcoin's core network remains remarkably unchanged. The same protocol that processed Satoshi's first transaction to Hal Finney in 2009 continues processing millions of transactions today. The same mathematical principles that secured the first blocks continue securing the latest blocks. The same open source code that anyone could download and run 15 years ago remains open source and runnable today. This stability, in the face of constant external change, represents Bitcoin's greatest achievement. While governments have risen and fallen, currencies have hyperinflated, banks have collapsed, and technological paradigms have shifted, Bitcoin has maintained mathematical consistency. It's like a digital lighthouse, unchanging while storms rage around it. But Bitcoin's future remains as uncertain as its past was unpredictable. Will it become the global reserve currency that its most enthusiastic supporters envision? Will it remain a niche store of value for wealthy individuals and institutions? Will new technologies make it obsolete, or will it adapt and evolve to meet new challenges? The quantum computing threat looms on the horizon, potentially requiring fundamental changes to Bitcoin's cryptography. Climate change concerns may force renewed debates about energy consumption. Regulatory crackdowns could fragment Bitcoin's global network. New cryptocurrencies with superior technology might challenge Bitcoin's dominance. Yet Bitcoin has survived every previous existential threat through a combination of technological resilience, economic incentives, and community determination. Its decentralized nature makes it remarkably difficult to kill. There's no central server to shut down, no CEO to arrest, no headquarters to raid. Banning Bitcoin is like banning mathematics, technically possible, but practically absurd. Perhaps most importantly, Bitcoin has achieved something unprecedented in monetary history: truly international, apolitical money. For the first time since the gold standard's collapse, there exists a monetary system that no single government or institution controls. This achievement alone justifies Bitcoin's existence, regardless of its future price or adoption rate. The stories in this chronicle, the mysterious creator, the pizza purchase, the exchange collapses, the scaling wars, the institutional adoption, will likely seem quaint to future observers. Bitcoin's current price, whatever it is when you're reading this, will seem either ridiculously low or impossibly high to people reading 20 years from now. But the fundamental questions Bitcoin raises will remain relevant as long as humans use money. Who should control currency creation? How do we balance privacy with transparency? What is the relationship between technology and trust? How do we create systems that serve humanity rather than enslaving it? Bitcoin doesn't answer these questions definitively, but it has reframed them in ways that can't be undone. Even if Bitcoin itself eventually becomes obsolete, the concepts it introduced, decentralized consensus, cryptographic money, programmable value transfer, will influence monetary systems for generations. In the end, Bitcoin's greatest contribution might not be creating better money, but proving that better money is possible. It demonstrated that small groups of determined individuals can build technologies that challenge the most powerful institutions on Earth. It showed that open-source software can compete with trillion-dollar corporations. It proved that mathematical consensus can replace institutional trust. These lessons extend far beyond cryptocurrency. Bitcoin's development model has influenced everything from social media to space exploration. Its economic principles have informed new approaches to corporate governance and organizational design. Its philosophical implications have sparked debates about technology, politics, and human nature that will continue long after Bitcoin itself is forgotten. You close your laptop, the blockchain still humming somewhere in the digital ether, blocks being mined by machines scattered across the globe, transactions being processed by networks that never sleep. Tomorrow, there will be new Bitcoin drama, price volatility, regulatory news, technical developments, community arguments, the eternal return of digital money, cycling through the same patterns of hope and fear, innovation and reaction, creation and destruction. But tonight, in the quiet moments between the noise, you can hear something remarkable: the sound of thousands of computers around the world, working together without central coordination, maintaining a shared truth that no single authority controls. It's the sound of consensus without authority, trust without institutions, and money without governments. It's the sound of the future, humming quietly in server farms and basement mining rigs, one block at a time. The revolution will be cryptographically secured,